Oh, and I should say before that, this is really an important story. Before Kevin got to Nippon, and this is why I think Nippon was primed for U.S. renditions. Nippon had been asked to release an English version of the Starblazers film, of the Yamato film comics as Starblazers. They called them the Starblazers film comics. I think the idea originated with Voyager in Japan, the company that owned Yamato. And to give them credit, they were like, how can we take advantage of the Starblazers audience? So they created an English language film comic that Nippon was asked to be the exclusive distributor of. So it was kind of the first English language that I'm aware of. I think it was the first English language anime, comic, or manga that had been released in the US for the American market. Nippon said yes, and they were talked into taking on 30,000 copies of Volume 1 and 30,000 copies of Volume 2, and they only probably needed about 5,000 of each.
I was going to say, that's a huge print run.
A huge print run, and it became known to us who inherited it later as Starblazers Mountain, because it was literally a mountain of boxes 10 feet, 15 feet off the ground, because I used to climb on top of it and just stand there. We had thousands of Volume 1 and 2. Thousands. Kevin came in right around the time Volume 3 was being printed, and the first thing he said was like, we're going to cut this down to 5,000 copies of Volume 3, 4, and 5, because we just don't need 30,000, and we're going to end up with a bunch of books that we're not going to be able to move, which is what happened. So Volume 1 and 2 kind of was excessively printed, and Volumes 3, 4, and 5 were modestly printed and sold through. But I think that primed Nippon management, having had at least some success releasing a Starblazers dedicated English graphic novel for US fans, that primed them for US renditions. I think what Starblazers did right, all credit to whoever did it back then, is they preserved the integrity of the show for the most part. They changed the focus a little bit from the ship to the characters. They did rename and westernize the characters. But the emotional impact and the emotional cadence of the series that Matsumoto-san and Ishizaki-san and everyone did for the series in Japan was intact. I think what they did with the dub of that series, maybe not even realizing how smart they were at the time, was they kept it pretty faithful. Battle of the Planets, when you look at it relative to Gatchaman, it's pretty much a hack job. They cut it up. They inserted animation that they created of a robot to make 7's Arc 7 that was like supposed to be an R2-D2 knockoff. They even animated some of the characters in America and inserted that animation to try to make their version of the show make sense. And most importantly, I think the music was intact. And the music is phenomenal. It was then, it is now. It's one of the best BGM scores probably ever for an anime series. Like John Williams did for Star Wars, I think the music for Yamato is really a crucial element. And they preserved the music in the dub, and it's very emotional, and it just hit us like this is a serious show about people trying to save the earth and going to war, and there are consequences to what's going to happen. And I was probably, well, I can tell you exactly how old. I was 12 in 1979, very much dating myself.
But that's a perfect age.
And it just totally hit me. I just completely bought into these characters, what they were going through. And I literally would race home to make sure I didn't miss because there were no VCRs, at least I didn't have one. And that began me exploring more about the show, which led to discovering anime fandom, honestly. An important piece of the story of what happened with anime from 1985 to 1990 is Robotech. Robotech was, as everyone knows, an attempt to link 3 unrelated Tatsunoko shows and create one storyline, which Carl Masick had been sort of charged with doing. At some point, the strategy changed. They were not going to do Macross as a series of VHS releases. They decided, let's just combine these shows and do it for broadcast. I don't know who made that decision. I'm not sure Carl ever explained how that decision was made. But I do want to give Carl credit for that his original intention was to do just a straight dub of Macross, change the names a little, but for the most part, just put it out the way it was released in Japan. It was Harmony Gold, I think, that wanted to combine the shows, and he said yes to figuring out a storyline that would combine the shows. But it had landed pretty well, like as well, if not better than Starblazers. I still don't think Robotech can be called a mass success. I know people from Harmony Gold even now would disagree with what I just said. I don't think you could call it a mass success. The first mass anime was Pokemon to me. I mean, and by mass, I mean it was on the cover of TV Guide. I think even Dragon Ball was extremely successful, but I think Pokemon was the big anime breakthrough for broadcast television. Robotech was a cult success on the level of Starblazers, but it generated a lot of heat for sure. At Nippon, all the Macross books were selling. There was definitely a moment that Robotech helped create for fandom in the US. It was a gateway for a lot of people to start watching anime, other shows, wanting to see the Macross movie. That was a big thing. The picture I'm trying to paint is when Ken walked in 1988, 89, talking about releasing subtitled anime, Robotech had kind of primed the market for that. And Nippon said yes, because you felt like a crest was building for anime in the US that started with Robotech. Now, your young viewers will not be able to wrap their heads around this concept, but there was a time in the early days of the anime industry when there was a thing called dubbing versus subbing. In fact, I was on a dubbing versus subbing panel representing the dubbing side in 1992 when we released our first dubs. It was me and Carl Masick representing dubbing. Robert Woodhead was representing subbing, and someone else who I can't remember. There were two from each side. It ended up being dubbing versus dubbing because Carl and I got into a big argument on the panel where I criticized his dubs and he criticized ours. Robert Woodhead had the best line after that panel as he wrapped up, said, "Well, thanks for coming to the dubbing versus dubbing panel." But you have to remember, in VHS days before DVDs, you had to make a choice. You couldn't do both. Am I doing a subtitled VHS release or am I doing a dubbed VHS release? Thank God for the DVDs when that no longer became a thing. But for a while it was a thing. So a lot of people hated dubs. A lot of people loved subs. Toshi Yoshida is someone who famously says, "I don't like to read my anime." He's always been a dub guy, even though he can understand Japanese. But he felt subtitling was an inferior way to watch anime. So when we decided to go from subtitling to dubbing, it was almost like a controversial decision because we were going in with the dubbing people, which were Harmony Gold and Streamline. Looking at it now as a middle-aged, much more seasoned, wise, life experience person, I found Carl contentious. And so I was criticizing his work. Carl could be very provoking. I think that's a fair statement. If I sat down with Carl now, if Carl were alive, who I am now, I think we could have a really interesting conversation. At the time, he really wanted to be the guy that was bringing anime to the US. Like I say, I was there at the LA Worldcon when he stood up and said, "I want to do a very faithful dub of Macross. Here are the first 3 episodes. We're releasing this on VHS. It's going to be called Macross Booby Trap." And he was purporting himself as that guy. Then someone at Harmony Gold decided we're going to recreate the storyline, and then Carl became that guy, and he was very defensive about his role in all that. He would, I think, put his foot in his mouth often. He would say things like, "Well, the visuals of Macross are great, but I think the story of Robotech is better." He would say that to anime fans like me, and I was like, "You didn't create this. Shoji Kawamori, Haruhiko Mikimoto created this." I was one of those guys that he would rile up. So when I became a professional, quote unquote, and was on panels with Carl, some of that old, feeling would come up when he would start pontificating about how he was doing everything right and everyone was doing everything wrong. To be fair to him, I think some of his dubs that he did at Streamline were great, but I think the way he positioned himself as the authority when I felt like he had sort of disrespected the creators of Macross, Southern Cross, and Most PETA in his comments. I actually liked Robotech when I watched it on broadcast as a fan. I appreciated it the way I appreciated Starblazers. I didn't particularly have a bias against westernizing anime at that time, but it was some of the things he said, like, well, we're doing this better. We've recreated the story. It's better than the original, that I thought, as a creator, I would be pretty offended if I was Shoji Kawamori or Haruhiko Mikimoto. So I kind of would attack his dubs on that basis. But to be fair, I think at Streamline, he did try to course correct. He tried to do faithful dubs. I think he kind of learned the hard way for some of the early remarks he made. I think he kind of changed as he matured, we all matured, but that was sort of the basis of my antagonism with Carl. Now, the thing is, and I want to say this with all candor, we did not do a very good job when we started out either. So I also think my perspective, my empathy for Carl became a little better after we started dubbing, because it's tough. It's hard. And back then, we didn't have the resources that people have now. And I think I, at one point, even said to Carl, I was pretty tough on your dubs, but to be fair to you, it's pretty hard to do. And I think our dubs also deserve a lot of criticism. And I did say that to him. I don't think he appreciated it, really. But at least I was mature enough to express that to him at one point before he passed away. So I'm glad I at least had that opportunity. We would sit and together as a group, imagine this, just the worst possible way to do this. Kenny Yodomi, Kevin Seymour, myself, would sit and watch the episodes in Japanese. Ken would translate each line as it was spoken. We would write down his translation, and then Kevin and I would try different versions, mouthing it ourselves, watching the animation, trying to figure out what what would work best for syncing. So we would sit at LA Hero. I remember this like as yesterday, very much like this setting, watching a TV, not a big flat screen, a little TV. It would be like Guyver, the character's name was Sho. There's a zoonoid coming, Ken would say, okay, the Japanese is saying, beware the coming zoonoid. He would give us a very little, Kevin and I would write it down. So we would be shouting at the TV, taking turns, trying different versions. And the one that matched the most, my job was to type it, and that's how we wrote the ADR scripts. It was a nightmare. I have no idea why we thought that was the best process. And a lot of people did it that way. I mean, that's kind of the only way you could do it.
Still do.
What matches. But doing it in a group setting was nuts.
Yeah.
I would just be like, Kevin, you got this. And he would, because Kevin was a singer, he had been in a band, he was a performer, so he could kind of act it out. And I realized I was useless in that so I just became the guy capturing whatever we decided was the final line of dialogue. That's how we wrote scripts. It still pains me to think about. It was so tedious.
Well, this explains why there's like 17 people for the English screenplay credits for Orcas.
Exactly. So it's funny, after having gone through that kind of mental purge, I came back to it with that same love. And funny enough, it was Yamato 2199, the reboot, that got me really into watching anime again, because I loved it. And I loved it for all the same reasons I love Starblazers. Looking at the books that I had collected my whole life wasn't a painful memory anymore. It was a happy memory. And, we've lost a lot of people. Kevin Seymour, Torrance Smith, Carl Masick, as you get older in life, people you knew that were your contemporaries when they're gone, it changes your perspective, I think, on everything, and now I see it all as sweet and nostalgic, and I have nothing but really, even the bad memories are now good memories, But yeah, I do enjoy watching new anime. I still gravitate towards space opera. I think Attack on Titan and what happened with the anime and the manga on that was phenomenal, impressive. just as a piece of business, how well that landed in the US. I absolutely adored when I saw it and still do Cowboy Bebop, and I was so proud of everyone. I should mention this. When I got to Bandai in 2004, I'd seen a little bit of Bebop, but one of my jobs was maybe to do an original Bebop manga. It never happened, but I sat and watched all the episodes. And honestly, I was so proud of Kevin and Mary Elizabeth, who I didn't know, and Steve Bloom. When I watched that, I was like, God, they've come so far, because it was such a good dub. I mean, it played on Cartoon Network continuously for 10 years, one season, over and over and over, because number one, the show is brilliant, the music's brilliant, but my team, my guys, my friends did such a fabulous job dubbing that, and I'm so proud of them. And Les worked on that. Mary Elizabeth, who I didn't know at the time, but I know now, was a big part of that. Yutaka was a big part of that. So when I watched that, when I got to Bandai and watched that, I was like, man, this is great. There's just so much great anime. I still say, kids, you have no idea how good you have it. You can just watch Netflix and see it as it's coming out in Japan. You can go to Crunchyroll. You have everything you ever wanted at the click of a button. I used to go to these little weird places in LA on Saturdays, huddle around a TV with all these old guys, and watch blurry seventh generation, that's the word I was looking for, second, third generation dubs of broadcast anime from Japan. No one could even tell what the hell was going on, but there we were. And now it's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's still kind of, every once in a while I'll say Dave Riddick or someone who was there, can you believe how far it's come and what it is now? It's just part of our culture. And that's great. That's what we were all dreaming about. And it's become that. So that makes me really happy, because I feel like all that rough pavement we laid, as a group, all of us, Animego, us, John O'Donnell, Carl. I get weirded out by all of it. David and I joked when I did go back to Anime Expo for the first time after 8 years, and I mean this in the most politically correct way I could say it. There were no girls at Anime Expo the first couple years. There were two. There was Trish Ledoux and maybe Junko Ito and a couple of others. To see the cosplay, the whole impact of Sailor Moon, all the stuff I had missed, it was like walking into a new world. I was like, oh, there are female. My daughter, who's 12, absolutely loves Miyazaki. I took her to Anime Expo this year. She cosplayed. Talk about full circle, and to see that the fandom is now all-inclusive, because it was a lot of dudes at the beginning. Dudes who were into Macross, Gundam, military. And now it's everything. And that blows my mind. But I do think it's important to remember, how it came from, because it was something that was really important to a lot of people to try to create a place. Now, would it have happened without all of us? Probably. Someone else would have done it. And the core of it, which I want to make sure I'm underlining, is the work itself. It's the creators in Japan. It's not us. We are the middlemen. Some people would lose sight of that. John Lasseter, when he championed Miyazaki at Disney, for Disney to release all their films, he was the middleman. You need someone championing the material. But at the end of the day, it's what the creators, the writers, the artists, the animators, the visionaries in Japan have created that makes it work for a global audience. That's the bottom line. It's appealing to everyone. Anime is a cultural export like none other. Maybe only Hollywood can be compared the way Star Wars is global. But, if you look at Miyazaki and what he's done, everyone loves Miyazaki, whether they're an anime fan or not. They love Totoro. They love those movies. And that's what it's about. It's about the work that's coming out of Japan that makes it work for everyone else. And without that, we're just distributors, basically. But you have to have the love and the passion at the beginning. You had to have that because it was painful. We were not getting a lot of support from video retailers. We were not getting a lot of support even from comic shops, like subtitled VHS tapes. That's crazy. But it worked, and we were like, no, this can work. There's an audience for unedited, non-westernized anime. We believed in that. That was our thing. I love Speed Racer as much as the next guy, but we don't need to change this to make it work in the West. I still have nostalgia for those things. There's something fun about what a hack job Battle of the Planets is. There's something about the fact that now it's just the pure feed from Japan that's fantastic.